Okay, all personnel, kind of keep it down in the control room, please. We are coming up on another event here in the terminal countdown timeline, coming up on about T-minus 40 minutes or in about 2 minutes. Right, all personnel, we're going to be picking up on page 3.27. We're at the T-minus 40-minute time mark and event. Step 4.61, SCE, let's go ahead and initiate the terminal count sequencer IOC for substep alpha. Let's go ahead and enable TCC user underscore hold. Let me know when that's enabled.
Copy. User hold enabled in green.
Copy, and then please enable STCTR48, please, the stage controller terminal countdown engine anomaly, if not already enabled.
STCTR48 enabled in green.
Copy that. Takes us to step 4.62, sequencer. Let's go ahead and perform the stage controller terminal count sequencer setup as follows. Please ensure the countdown timer is open.
CDT window is open.
And ensure your display test commit criteria is also open.
TCC display is also open.
Copy. And we're going to go to substep Charlie. If you would, verifies on the terminal count sequencer that the IOC has been initiated.
Verifying initialization was successful.
Copy. And verify engine configuration is hot fire.
Engine configuration is hot fire.
And verify display configuration is hot fire.
Display configuration is also hot fire.
For substep 4, please record the version of the GLS events table being used for today.
Okay, version hot fire, version R98 Rev 8.
Did you copy that, BQA1?
No, sir.
Engine configuration being used today is hot fire, version R98 Rev 8.
Version hot fire R98 Rev 8.
Correct, that's alpha.
Copy, it takes the top of 3.
A is that alpha, right?
Hot fire R98 Rev 8, copy.
Okay, that takes us to the top of page 328 for substep 5. Verify that the engine configuration is the desired version of the GLS events table that you just mentioned.
Confirmed.
And verify the display configuration is also the desired version of the GLS event stable.
Also confirmed.
Okay, under your TCS engine status, verify activate sequencer is selected and displayed.
TCS engine status activated.
Copy that. Okay, further note there, TCS will automatically stop at the T-minus 10-minute hold point. HEA, if you're on 16, step 4.63 is yours.
Copy that. NTC is HEA in 16.
Give me a second. Here's coming to 16.
Go for NTC. NTC, can you please verify and or perform a helium spin start panel activation per DOP 11 to provide 1,000 to 1,300 PSIG to the CAPUs? Roger that. It is set up. Copy that. It is complete. Record a UTC on that of 016-21-17-07. Copy 016-21-17-07.
Copy that, and the NTC, the next step is yours per step 4.64, please.
Roger that. And in BTC, let's go ahead and prepare the deflector for test configuration. And he's on the phone, but he's been coordinating with the water plant, and he'll get the bypasses open in just a moment.
Copy that. And then NTC, per our discussion, we will we will maintain the current timeline and the current countdown time per our discussion.
Roger that. Sounds good.
You are watching NASA's Green Run Hot Fire test here at Stennis Space Center. The teams are in a hold, but we are still well within our window for today's test still, and I am lucky to have Alex here with me. We've heard a lot of conversations from the control room over the past few minutes. I heard hot fire a lot. I heard water a few times. You're the expert. What were you hearing?
So the test conductor instructed everyone to go back into our terminal countdown sequence. And so at this point, we are about 30 minutes away from the hot fire according to the terminal countdown sequence. Some of the other things they're kind of talking about, they're turning on the water deflectors, right, for the engine test. So there's certain configurations that we need to put each thing on the stand or thing on the ground in a certain configuration for that hot fire. So they're supplying certain amount of pressure to different components inside the engine section, and like we said, turning on those water deflectors, retracting some of the stands around those engines, really to prepare the stand and the core stage for hot fire.
We heard at least 2 people talking, is that right? What were those people, what are those positions back there?
Right, so the test conductor is basically relaying information to individuals working a console, and each of those console workers are either going through test criteria, right? So we have test commit criteria for each part of the test. They're looking at different things that are happening with the stand. They may be controlling the water going onto the stand. So he is in direct communication with each person that is working each individual component on the stand. So you'll hear him giving out a lot of commands of things that need to go according to our countdown sequence.
And where are they? They're even closer than we are, right? And they're in a safe place, I hope.
Right, absolutely. They're in a test control center closer to the stand. And that stand is wired, has wires running all the way to the test control center. And in the test control center, they can see everything going on. They can see all the cameras, and they're each sitting at console, and they'll be able to make decisions real time. So, they're sitting in a building. It's fully blast proof, right? It has giant blast doors closed in there. So, the team's working really hard. There's a lot of people in there looking at a lot of stuff. So, they're obviously working through it and working towards hot fire.
And those
He's in one part inside the test control room, so he's talking in a regular voice, kind of like we are, and then he could be communicating with someone on the far end of the room, or he could be communicating with someone sitting right next to him. But that's all over the audio, kind of like we're hearing.
So is this considered normal when you think about testing a rocket?
Yeah, absolutely. That there's a ton of people who play a part in the actual test of a rocket or in the launch of a rocket, right? So you have to have a proper way of communicating, proper one-way or two-way channels, so that the correct people can be heard at the correct time. So everything that's happening is obviously planned as far as communication, working through issues, and then now that we're in our close to 30-minute terminal countdown, we'll be hearing a lot more things over the radio.
And we heard about this window. So there's a certain amount of time that they have to be able to light these engines. It's not like a launch window where we're trying to reach the moon, so we have to pay attention to that. But what does this window mean? So,
there's certain operating guidelines that we have for certain things in the engine. There's certain times that we can have avionics boxes powered on, and there's certain times that we're allowed to have the batteries running on internal power, things like that. Obviously, while the core stage is integrated to the stand, we have a little more leeway because the stand is supplying a lot of that power, supplying a lot of the materials we need to continue testing. It's going to be more of a process for them to determine what the next step forward is for testing, and I'm sure it's something we'll hear over the test conductor audio.
Okay, I'm going to be coming back to you a lot more. Again, we're going to keep you in the hot seat here, even though it's cold outside. We're all excited for the big hot blast coming in. I think you said about 30 minutes is
Yep.
what we're expecting. So again, what we're going to do, a reminder, this is a live test. We're still listening in for the control room teams as they're reviewing this data as we're leading up to the test point. They're still having a conversation right now about the appropriate steps to move forward. So again, we're going to join you. We're going to take a step back and just watch. We're going to look at the test stand and listen in for the control center. We're going to let Alex digest it all for us, and we'll come back to you in just a few minutes. And you are watching NASA's Green Run Hot Fire Test here at Stennis Space Center. The teams are in a hold, but we are still well within our window for today's test. And we did just get an update. And so we've got our expert here, Alex, a core stage engineer. Alex, what did we just hear from the control room? So
our test conductor is kind of discussing a path forward, obviously, with our test. Right now, we're about the T-minus 10-minute mark, so we're in a holding pattern for that T-minus 10. They're going to go around, continue to monitor our fuel levels, our propellant, how much propellant we have, not only in the core stage itself, but also we have on reserve. And then over the next 10 to 15 minutes, they'll kind of have a discussion about, our propellant reserves, the path forward, and whether we're going to go into that T-minus 10-minute countdown sequence.
Okay, so we heard about one hold earlier when we started taking our pauses and listening in. This sounds like we're in a different hold, is that right?
Right, so the T-minus 10 hold is really the last major milestone before we get into a lot of the major operations that we use to get into the actual hot fire. So, starting at the T-minus 10 mark, every minute we have a lot of very important tasks that we'll be doing up until hot fire.
Okay, so let's walk through those. What else will we expect to hear once we hit T-minus 10? And then what are some of the calls we can expect to listen in on and expect going forward?
Right, so once we start T-minus 10 count, we'll have a lot of software that gets initiated to start the hot fire, right? And some of that's automated, some of it's not. We'll move into activation of some of our major propulsion components. We'll turn on our CAPUs at about the 4-minute mark, and those are used to kind of steer our engines with our hydraulic system. From there, we'll start certain purges inside the engine section, and then we'll move into internal power within the rocket, so it's fully powering itself, and then we'll start the engine sequence.
And a reminder, this is a live show. We are listening into the control room. It's very important that Alex doesn't just keep talking, giving us interesting answers the whole time, because he needs to listen in to be able to digest what we're hearing so he can tell us what's going on and we can get more of an update. So we're going to do that now. We're going to take another pause. We're going to sit back with you just like you are at home, and we're going to watch the test stand. We're going to have Alex listen into the control room so we can come back and find out when we can watch the SLS core stage hot fire test. We'll be right back. And if you've been with us since the top of the show, you've heard me say this a few times, but we are so happy you're still here with us. You are watching NASA's Green Run Hot Fire Test here at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. The teams are still in a hold, and we are still within today's window for the test. We do have an update, so I'm excited again to have Alex Cagnola here with us. Alex, what's happening right now?
So right now our teams are still kind of doing some preps before we move into our T-minus 10-minute count. There's a lot of just individual preps you have to do on the stand, individual components. You know, certain configurations we have to put everything in before we actually do perform that hot fire. You know, they're going around, they're polling all of our program management and our chief engineers to see, you know, are we good to go on? You know, or we need to move on. You know, we're also monitoring other things. You know, we're monitoring how much propellant we have in the tanks, how much propellant we have on reserve on the barges to use for the hot fire. And then just as we work through those issues, we'll hear more information as we get closer.
So you said monitoring how much propellant we have on the tanks. Why is that important at this step?
Right, so this whole time before we go into hot fire, we're in a phase called replenish phase. And I know we kind of talked about that, but you know, that fuel is very, very cold, and you know, and then outside right now it's not as cold, right? And so, you know, constantly that fuel is being converted into gas and then vented out of the tanks, and then so the entire time we're in a phase called replenish, where we're constantly pumping a little bit of fuel back into the tanks to make sure it's at max capacity.
And we've said at the beginning of this show that this hot fire test can last up to 8 minutes. What I understand is we can learn a lot in just the first few minutes. Is that right?
Right. You know, a lot of the engineering data we're looking to get really comes in the first 250 seconds. So, you know, whenever we do initiate hot fire, you know, we're going to be gimbling our engines a little bit, right? So we'll be moving the engines in a certain pattern that'll kind of mirror what we might expect during launch. You know, we'll be throttling down the engines for a while, and then we might throttle them back up. You know, there's a lot of things that we're going to try out, and most of those things will be in the first 250 seconds. Obviously, we want to go for the full 8 minutes that we will see during launch, but, you know, I think that we'll get a lot of really useful data in those first few minutes.
So you said gimbling the engines, moving them a little bit. It's not like a NASCAR turn or anything like that. We'll be seeing the engines, right? Just small movements? Yeah,
it's very, very small movements, and you might not even notice. You know, it's only a few degrees in each way, you know, and you might see a couple of them move the same time, or you might not. But that few degrees can really change your trajectory of your rocket when you do launch it. So it's important to be able to test that here at Stennis while we're hot firing, and not just when the engines are just sitting there, right? It's a lot different when you have all that thrust coming out the bottom of the rocket than it is just testing it without it.
So I'd love for you to take a second with me and just take a look back. We can see a little bit of white steam, smoke coming out. Can you describe that for us?
Right, so what you're kind of seeing right now is the max deflectors, the water deflectors on the flame ramp, right? So we kind of talked about how much water they're pumping, you know, 110,000 gallons every 20 minutes or so. So it's a lot, you know, it's a lot of water coming out, you know, and roughly 32,000 holes on that flame ramp that are all pumping water. So, you know, obviously you're going to see a lot of mist before the hot fire. And they'll actually even increase the amount of water coming up when we do get closer as well.
And those are called flame buckets, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a flame bucket. You know, you might even see some flame coming out of there whenever we do light up all 4 engines. So it'll be very exciting. You know, and you know, obviously all the safety systems are in place to take care of that when we do hot fire.
Okay, and again, we are still in a hold. In some way, this is a planned hold. We've got different versions of holds throughout the test. And as we get more information, we're going to come back. We still have Alex here with us. I'm not going to let him leave. You're going to stay mic'd into your chair right here because we want your expertise on what's going on. And as soon as we have more information from the control room, we're going to come right back to you. For now, we are going to take a step back and look at the test stand just like you are at home, and we'll be back in a few minutes. We've got our most exciting update in a few minutes. We are now inside terminal count. And again, I'm not the expert here. We've got Alex Cagnola with us, who's going to explain what that means and how did we get to this point.
Right, so the test conductor just came on the audio and alerted us that we're about 9 minutes away, actually. So we'll be getting some pretty regular updates here. We'll be hearing some activation of some different components on the rocket before the hot fire. And obviously there's a lot of steps that we'll be hearing going into the actual hot fire with things like we talked about CAPU activation, move to internal power. If there's any kind of audio that might slow down the terminal count, they'll kind of come on the air and tell us that too. But right now we are in that final sequence that lasts, 8.5 to 8 minutes. So we're going to sit back and kind of listen for the updates from the test conductor.
And this wasn't one person's decision. This is a full group that has to make the decision that we are ready to keep going.
Right, every big decision.
Hold on 1 second. What I do want to remind everyone now is that you're actually able to hear the control room audio just like we are. So what we're going to try to do is when the test conductor starts talking, I'm going to rudely cut Alex off in the middle of what he's talking about and try to make sure that we can all listen in, give him enough time to understand that call. So we just missed one. Again, this is a live show, but I want to get back to how we got to this decision. And again, it's not just one person.
Right, that goes back to, we have a great team working all the engineering issues, and then obviously, they kind of come up with a story about what's going on, and they present that in the best way possible to our program management and to, those who are the big decision makers. And so every time we have a big milestone like this, we have to poll the whole board. Everyone brings up their concerns, or if they think, going forward, what they think, and then do a go, no-go poll. And it sounds like everyone was a go. So we're moving forward to terminal count.
Okay, and again, you can hear some of that test conductor audio. I'm sure you couldn't hear that one because you were talking, giving us a great explanation. But now I do want to know, so within these 10 minutes, we're now about 7 minutes, I understand. What are we expecting to hear from the test conductor?
Right, you'll hear a test conductor say a few things like initiate purge start, and that purge will be a nitrogen gas purge inside the engine section. That's part of just the normal sequence of purging the whole area around the engines before you initiate hot fire. You'll hear move to internal power. That's a big one. We'll take all the boxes and all the batteries, everything on board. The core stage will be powering itself, almost like you would have during launch. And then you'll move into ALS start, which is our pre-ignition engine start, and that'll be right before, 30 seconds before T0, where we'll power up the engines.
Okay, so we're about
6 minutes on my mark.
We just heard about 6 minutes. Was that right?
That is 6 minutes away, so they're going to start really having a lot more calls on the audio. We're going to hear, we might even hear some things being turned on inside the core stage. So, obviously we'll start talking less as we hear more audio come through.
Okay, sure. What will those things sound like?
So you'll hear TCC, more and more calls. They'll be talking to more in the control room with individuals. They'll be talking to people.
Go ahead, sir.
Looks like somebody opened a terminal TCS window.
Yeah, nobody else should have the TCS GUI. If you have it open, please close it at this time.
So right, they're just working through some small things between all the monitors. They're opening and closing certain things that need to be closed inside the Rocky. From the stand. They're going to completely secure the stand with everything that needs to be done before the hot fire. And really, it's just the final preps before we do initiate engine start.
Okay, again, you are all hearing what we're hearing. We're pausing whenever the test conductor is speaking or other people in the control center are speaking because we're trying to learn what's happening to the rocket.
On my mark.
It sounds like about 5 minutes away on their mark. Again, remind us who's the one in our ear. What's that role?
So that's our green run test conductor, and he's kind of been the one in control of all the green run test cases, not just this one leading up to this point. So he has a great working relationship with all those that are on the test team. And so obviously right now we're in T-minus 5 minutes. So there'll be a lot of activation going up until we do hot fire. So, like we said, CAPU spin up, move to internal power, purge sequence, and then we'll move into engine activation. It's all going to come pretty clear.
I'm going to pause you for a second.
TCC violation, we're holding at T-minus 4 minutes 47.
I copy that.
BTD, PEA, it's the Delta P sensors.
Okay. Copy that. We'll wait till we get to the hold at T-minus 440. We're in the hold time. We're in the go. And if you want to go ahead and use that pre-plan.
DLH, let's go to manual mode and try to dial in lead Delta P, please.
if this is the right time. Can you break down what we just heard?
So they're moving into some final sequencing. Obviously, you can see on the flame bucket, they've now initiated max water flow into that flame bucket, so you'll be seeing a lot more mist coming from that flame bucket.
We do have 2 minutes 35 seconds for the hold, so
it looks like you need to come down.
So we are 2 minutes 35 seconds before the 1 minute and 40 hold, from what I understand. So obviously that 1 minute 40 hold will be the last little bit.
The hold timer.
Before we do start up the engine, so it's very exciting.
You're getting excited. I can hear everyone around us getting excited. This is great. And what we're going to make sure we do is we have to make sure we're all being safe here.
Reset that whenever you get ready. We are at 1 minute and 30 seconds in the hold timer.
Okay, if you're in the band, go ahead and reset MPS 17, please.
So we're going to go ahead and take a step back. We're going to put our ear protection on. So we'll be moving into internal power. And again, putting our ear protection on, listening in from here on out, and observing this major milestone on America's return to the moon with Artemis.
Enable the sequencer.
Sequencer activated. Resume and count on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
Now we're counting down. The sequencer is counting. Coming up on T-minus 4 minutes on my mark. Mark. And T-minus 3 minutes on my mark. Mark. Coming up in T-minus 2 minutes on my mark. Mark. Coming up on T-minus 130. Mark. Coming up in T-minus 1 minute on my mark. Mark. If, for all personnel, report that you're ready to go. PEA.
Go.
AEA. HEA.
Go.
REA. Go. NTC. We're to go. All right, we're in ALS. We're going to engine start. And we're into plus count. Engine start. We're into plus count. Call for south speed, continue to monitor your system, and grass is in control. All right, plus 25 seconds.
DDRA, we did get an MCF on engine 4.
Copy that, but we're still running. Still got 4 good engines, right? Got that. It passes through 60 plus 60 seconds. Get into our first gimbal profile.
BTD is FCE.
Gotcha.
Do CCC violation on the rest.
And we got a shutdown. Yeah, all personnel. Shutdown looks like let's all go to page 656. Page 656, please. Okay, all personnel, it's going to be post-hot fire or shutdown securing operations on page 656.
BTD, I need you to verify with the engine guy.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Shutdown standby.
Yeah, all personnel, that does take us to the last page there on page 632. AR1, if you would, on step 4.241, please verify core stage engine 1s and 4 have shut down for that step, and we have a safe engine shutdown.
We are in post-shutdown standby, engines 1 through 4.
We just saw the core stage of SLS fire up. Of course, we also heard some test conductor come in, so we want to go straight to Alex. Alex, can you please describe to us, first of all, what we saw and then what we heard?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we had a very successful initiation of the engines. The beginning of our thrust profile there when we were firing for the first minute or so, we obviously are getting some really good data coming through. But like we said earlier, this is a test. We have test commit criteria and we have certain boundaries that we have to keep all the operations under. So, we really are trying to make sure that everything's operating properly and safely. So, the test team was kind of seeing some data that they might not like. And so obviously, our engines were shut down ahead of the 8-minute scheduled time frame. But we do have a lot of good data to go look at. And hopefully, we can move on from here and maybe get, see what's going to go on further. So
I was looking at your face when that started lighting up, and that was incredible. We saw the cloud forming. We both saw rainbows just forming right overside. Just how did it feel in those first few seconds?
Yeah, it's amazing. It never really gets old, that feeling that you get, in your chest, or, seeing, just how powerful those rockets are when they're testing. So Obviously, it was an awesome thing to see, and I can't wait to get the core stage to Kennedy and get ready for launch.
And you told us, over 8 minutes we might have had tons and tons, terabytes worth of data, but we already have data just from right now. What are they going to do with that right away?
Right, and so just like all of our other green run tests, we have teams that are going to go and break down that data and kind of see what we're seeing in our profiles, right? And so, that all goes into the profile that we'll use for launch eventually at Kennedy. So, obviously there's a lot of things to look at the data. We kind of talked about, over the span of our green run testing, we have roughly 800 terabytes of data, and that's a lot of data. We're talking about it's hard to grasp how much data that is. So, we'll obviously take the time to dig through everything, and then obviously have a path forward from there.
And I know it happened really fast, but can you tell us what the people were talking about that we could hear from the test conductor in that audio?
Right, so after we did engine initiation, they're kind of going through and monitoring everything, right? So obviously once we are actually firing the engines, we have to look at, all of our engine readings when it comes to temperatures, how they're reacting, how they're moving, and all that stuff. We were just getting into our gimbal profiling test, which is moving the engines around right before we terminated the hot fire. So we're obviously going to have a lot of good data to look at.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I'm so glad you're here. And so as the engineers gather data from today, we look ahead to the next steps. This core stage will be lifted out of the B2 test stand and refurbished to patch up that orange foam insulation. Then the team will load it onto our Pegasus barge about as long as a football field to make a 6-day journey from the Gulf of Mexico to our Kennedy Space Center on Florida's Atlantic coast. There, it will be stacked in the iconic vehicle assembly building with other elements of the SLS rocket, including the twin solid rocket boosters, which our teams have already begun stacking on the mobile launcher. The core stage will join the boosters and then be stacked with the upper stage. And then the Orion spacecraft with the launch abort system on top. All of this work putting us on track to roll out to Launch Pad 39B for a liftoff later this year on Artemis 1. We are going to pause again and just talk about what we just experienced. The stage was rattling that we're on here. We saw everybody with their phones out who's able to be here today. Talk us through from right when the engine started. What did we just see?
Right, so you kind of, those last minute and a half, right, you're kind of hearing the test conductor talk about, move to internal power. All go for ALS startup, which is engine startup, right? And then at T-0, you heard the final count where they're kind of polling all the people who are really watching the critical components of the rocket, those critical readings we need right before we initiate engine start. So after, everyone kind of gave their go, we initiated engine start, obviously. And that ALS, you kind of saw the pre-burners going on that rocket. You kind of see some of the sparks flowing, right? And that's all part of the test. And then right before they start flowing, that fuel and that mixture, and then it ignites, and you see it at T-0. So that's kind of what we were seeing running up to the test. And then after that, you obviously saw the plume and then the rest of the test as well.
And we saw a few different angles. We were up really close to the engines. How were we able to see that?
Well, obviously we have, the cameras and all of our views on the stand are, obviously well-engineered cameras, very protective casings and all that. It's all important that we not only get the data, but all the video and the view of what exactly is going on.
Great. Well, thank you again. We may still come back to you, but I want to remind everyone, it's not just Artemis 1. We've got several firsts on the horizon. This year, the first of our commercial lunar payload services, or CLPS missions, begin with 2 companies delivering instruments to the lunar surface. The golf cart-sized Viper rover will search for water at the moon's south pole. A small CubeSat called Capstone will head to the moon, scouting the orbit to be used on later human missions. And Artemis 1 launches on an uncrewed flight to test both SLS and Orion on a journey beyond the moon and back to Earth. Later on, we'll be launching the Power and Propulsion Element, or PPE, and the Habitation and Logistics Outpost, or HALO, to lunar orbit to become the first pieces of our Lunar Gateway, which will provide the jumping-off point for lunar missions. Artemis 2 will be a 10-day crewed test flight where astronauts will set a new record for farthest distance traveled from Earth. And finally, Artemis 3 in 2024. The hardware for those next 2 Artemis missions is coming together right now at Michoud. The Boeing team is already demonstrating faster manufacturing times by implementing all the experiences and lessons from the building the first core stage. In Utah, Northrop Grumman is already building the booster segments for the next several missions as well. We've also got the Orion spacecraft for Artemis 2 down at Kennedy undergoing assembly. And the spacecraft for Artemis 3 is also being manufactured right now at Michoud in our hometown of New Orleans. So that wraps it up for us here today after a major milestone on America's return of astronauts to the lunar surface, a successful test of the core stage of the Space Launch System rocket. Up next, we'll be replaying the test, and we will have a post-test briefing in about 2 hours on NASA television. We invite you to follow all of our progress online at nasa.gov/Artemis program, or join the conversation online with @NASA-Artemis and @NASA_SLS. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with here and being our expert tonight. Thank you to the administrator, Jim Bridenstine, and astronaut Tracy Caldwell-Dyson. And most of all, thank you for joining us. And go Artemis.